What we need is not more medications, but more education, because the best prescription is knowledge. This is Exposé coming to you live from Lagos, Nigeria, every Monday on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook simultaneously. I'm your regular host, Tony Akinyemi. Don't forget, what we need is not more medication, but more education, because the best prescription is knowledge. Hello and welcome to Exposé with Tony Akinyemi, and I'm honored once again to be your host this beautiful Monday evening, this April 2025. This week is our Easter week. This week, Friday, is Good Friday, and this weekend is our Easter weekend. I do pray in advance that you have a very terrific Easter weekend in Jesus' mighty name. So today I want to round up and bring to a closure our short conversation on fermented foods, so that next week we can have our Easter edition of Exposé with Tony Akinyemi on Easter Monday next week. And subsequently, we begin to look at some other very interesting subjects on this platform. Now, I have spoken about why the need to ferment our food and why the need to consume fermented foods. And thirdly, I've also highlighted 10 very popular fermented foods around the world. We started with kefir, which was the first one that we mentioned, and then we talked about kombucha, and then we talked about sauerkraut, then we talked about pickles, we talked about miso, we talked about tempeh, then we talked about natto, and I spent a lot of time to talk about nattokinase, all right? When you use nattokinase with bromelain or serrapeptase with curcumin in turmeric, those three in particular in combination, I highly suggest and recommend them for those who took the COVID-19 vaccine, any one of them. They will help you in mopping up, over the months in front of you, the accumulation and aggregation of the spike proteins in your body. Then number 8, we spoke about kimchi. Then we spoke about raw cheese from goat milk or sheep milk or A2 cows. And then we spoke about the most popular one around the world, which is yogurt. All right, so now in this edition, I want to do essentially two things. One is to highlight some fermented foods in Nigeria. And then, of course, we look at some of the friendly bacteria that we find in fermented food that make them beneficial to our gut microflora. So in Nigeria, we ferment corn, and we call it fermented corn, okay? Different parts of Nigeria have different names for it. In southwestern Nigeria, it is called ogi, okay? In southeastern Nigeria, and around that area is called akamu. But then the general word that we all use in the colloquial language in Nigeria is pap. Pap, we call it pap. Now, when corn is fermented, dried corn is put in water and left for days, maybe a week or thereabout, for the corn to ferment. And then it is blended and it is sieved to remove the chaff or the fiber. And so what is left is what is called pap. Now, when you have that ogi, you normally put it in a jar or in a bucket, and then you have a little water on top of it. Of course, the water on top of it is fermented water. In western Nigeria, southwestern Nigeria, it is called omidun. That is, even though it's supposed, omidun means sweet water, okay? But that's a way to more or less entice people to say, look, this thing is palatable, take it. But it's actually sour water. It probably should be called omikan, but it's called omidun. All right, when you take that omidun, that sour water on top of the fermented blended corn, a glass of it, and drink it first thing in the morning, That's actually probiotics that you're getting there. It's bubbling with friendly bacteria, all right? Unfortunately, after corn is fermented, for us to eat it in Nigeria, we cook it. We cook the fermented corn. We boil water and we pour it into the fermented corn to make what we call ogi, or in southwestern Nigeria, we call it ekomimu. That is cooked fermented corn. By the time we cook it that way, the heat will have damaged some things, particularly the bacteria inside. The friendly bacteria will have been damaged, killed. That way, we have lost the probiotics in it. But then, because it's fermented, we still have the benefit of the digestibility and the high absorption of nutrients that is in it. Okay, you cannot almost not get constipated taking ogi or taking akamu or pap. You can never be constipated because it has been more or less pre-digested, as it were. It has been made very easily digestible by your digestive system, that when you take pap, either in liquid form or solid form, you cannot get constipated. It's almost not possible. Okay, it's one of the food items that are particularly fed to sick people, patients in hospitals in particular, who have issues either with loss of appetite or constipation or whatever. Eko, particularly the solid one, ekojije, as we call it in southwestern Nigeria, is one of those food items usually served to sick people in the hospital or at home. Okay, some people will mischievously call it oúnjẹ aláàárẹ̀. That is food for patients in the hospital, food for sick people. But then it's not food for sick people. Well, even if it's food for sick people, it simply means that it is medicinal. That's why it is being offered to sick people, because then it's easy for them to digest. It's very easy on their digestive system. And then it is easy to also absorb the nutrients in them to nourish back the sick person to get well. So I suggest that we all begin to eat that. And it's one of those things that we can actually eat at night, not the liquid form, the solid form in particular, because it's very light. It digests very easily, so you don't go to bed with a full stomach. All right, you go to bed, your food will have been almost completely digested. So when you're sleeping, your sleep is not disrupted, your body is not diverted or distracted to go and be digesting this heavy food in your tummy while you're supposed to be sleeping and rejuvenating. All right, so that is as far as ogi is concerned, pap. Now, the other one that we ferment, another fermented food that is very common in Nigeria, is what we call iru in southwestern Nigeria. Iru is actually fermented locust bean. And we use it as a spice to spice our food, particularly our sauces and our soups in Nigeria. And I suggest that rather than use chemicals like monosodium glutamate, MSG, that's you usually find in your cubes. Those cubes are usually 50% MSG plus various other things. They can then add things, beneficial things like, okay, we are putting iron for you. Okay, we are putting this one for you. We are putting that one for you. But it doesn't remove from the fact that MSG is still the most abundant ingredient in that cube. And MSG is counterproductive. It's neurotoxic. MSG creates a lot of inflammation and what have you, and you don't need it. Okay? So Iru is a very good substitute, a very good replacement for MSG spices, and it's fermented locust bean. And because it's fermented food, it also confers all the major benefits that we have talked about in the previous episodes on fermented food. Easily digestible. The fermentation also makes it to bubble with a lot of, nutrients, particularly end products of fermentation by the friendly bacteria. And it's also, it helps to extend the shelf life because it's fermented melon seed. All right, that is fermented locust bean rather. Then the next one, which is similar to it, is ogiri. Again, it's a southwestern Nigerian name, ogiri, which is fermented melon seed. And that is very popular, particularly in Ondo State of Nigeria, where I have spent the bulk of my lifetime. Okay? Now, this melon seed which is called egusi, is actually fermented, and then you can blend it into the ingredients and the recipe you use for making your local Nigerian soups. All right, and it gives it flavor, apart from also giving it the additional nutritional and medicinal benefits that it confers. It gives it flavor as well. It makes whatever you cook with it to taste, pleasantly. It gives you that umami taste, that savory taste. It's not sweet, it's not bitter, it's not sour, okay? But it is savory, umami. That's what they call it in Japan, umami. Yet in English, it's called savory. And ogiri and iru can add that. These are substitutes for chemical-based spices that many people are used to. I have found people who tell me, how can your soup or your sauce be tasty without adding MSG-based cubes? Two things I tell them. Number one, I said, what were our great-grandparents cooking with before those cubes surfaced? I mean, those cubes came on the scene in my lifetime. I was a little child when those cubes became popular. Towards the end of the 1960s to early 1970s. That was when those cubes that we are now addicted to, that was when they came on the scene. Before that time, there was nothing like that. And yet, our grandparents and great-grandparents were cooking delicious, tasty, and nutritious meals without those cubes. And all they were using were iru, ogiri, and some herbal spices, okay? I hope that in the future I'll be able to do a series on spices as well as teas. And then we'll be able to go deeper and dive in deeper into those herbal spices that we can use both to flavor our food and also as medicinal spices to spice our lives. So let's go back to our roots. Let's go back to these fermented foods, fermented spices, iru and ogiri, and start learning how to incorporate them and use them to cook delicious and health-giving meals. All right. Now, another fermented food that we have in Nigeria in particular is called pupuru. I think I've mentioned that in an earlier episode. That is fermented cassava product. Actually, there are about 3 or 4 different fermented cassava products that are very popular, pupuru being one of them. Gari is another one. Mischievously, when we were in secondary school, we call it garium sulfate because it's like flakes, garium sulfate, but it's actually fermented and roasted cassava products. It's called gari. Then we have fufu, which is another fermented cassava product. Then we have lafun. Actually, fufu and pupuru are similar, except that fufu is not smoked, it's not dried. You make it fresh and you cook it that way after fermenting it immediately. You don't dry it. But pupuru, you smoke it to make it dry and preserve it for long, and you can use it later. Lafun is also similar to fufu, but again, this time around, you dry it and make it into powder. So it's the same fermented cassava. One is smoked to dry it, it's called pupuru. One is flaked and roasted, it's called gari. One is cooked exactly immediately after it is fermented without drying, without smoking, without roasting. That's called fufu. And then one is fermented, dried, and powdered, and then used to make food later, and that's called lafun. These are all different types of cassava products that are fermented. Now, like I said, the problem with most of our fermented food in Nigeria is that we still cook them before we eat them. Most of the other fermented foods around the world are eaten raw. After fermentation, they are not cooked again. So the friendly bacteria are still bubbling inside. But our own, after we ferment, then we cook, and then we lose all the friendly bacteria in them. Although, like I said, the cooked fermented foods still offer benefits such as digestibility as well as preservation to extend shelf life. But we lose one of the benefits, which is the friendly bacteria that we have lost. That, of course, if you take the omidun or omikon, the water on top of fermented corn, then you are getting the friendly bacteria benefit from that. We're going to go on a short break right now. And when we come back, we will start looking at the different types of bacteria that could be found in fermented food and what health benefits they confer on us. Don't go away. I'll be back very shortly.
Across our communities, there are bright young minds brimming with big dreams, children eager to learn, grow and contribute to society. Yet, the burden of unpaid tuition and the fear of dropping out threatens their future. These are the children of widows, widowers, orphans, families displaced by life's challenges, and those struggling with poverty. The Reverend Tony Akinyemi Scholarship Foundation is on a mission to give hope to the hopeless, to lift the burden of struggling families, and to bring peace to young hearts through the gift of education.
Back in 2018, I was a secondary school dropout due to financial breakdown. I could not afford to pay my external exam fee.
I'm an indigenous student and I'm in deep need of financial support because I realized that my mom can't cope with paying my school fees anymore.
Your donation can help these brilliant students pursue their education without fear. It's more than a scholarship, it's hope, peace, and a brighter future for families in need. Join us and be part of this life-changing mission. Donate today.
Welcome back. This is still Exposé with Tony Akinyemi. What we need is not more medication, but more education. For the best prescription is knowledge. We're talking fermented foods. And today we are dedicating it to some Nigerian, popular Nigerian fermented foods. Of course, there are many others, but I have chosen fermented corn, which is ogi. Then fermented locust beans, which is called iru. Then fermented melon seeds, which is called ogiri. And then fermented cassava products like pupuru, like gari, like lafun, and like fufu, all fermented cassava products in Nigeria, very popular in Nigeria, particularly in the southwestern part of Nigeria. Of course, other parts of Nigeria also enjoy these kind of fermented foods, but they are more popular in the southwest. Okay, now, of course, fufu, which is called popularly known as loi loi in the south-south, is actually also very popular in the southeast and south-south part of Nigeria. All right. So now, in this second part, we want to look at two basic things. First, we'll be looking at different types of friendly bacteria that can be found in fermented foods. And then two, we'll be looking at some general health benefits derivable from consuming fermented foods. Now, what are the different types of bacteria that can be commonly found in fermented foods? One is called lactobacillus. Lactobacillus. Of course, the word lacto there should already give it away. Lacto is in reference to milk. Okay? Members of the Lactobacillus family are the celebrities of the probiotic world. You find it a lot in yogurts. And they grace, the packages of many yogurts and kefir bottles. They have found their way to many supermarkets around the world. Okay? And you can find maybe in a supermarket near you. All right? Now, they include such stars as L. acidobacillus, Another one is L. reuteri. And then we have different lactobacillus strains, which are known to protect against diarrhea, against constipation, and they also plays, an enhanced role in balancing our intestinal microflora, among other benefits. A second probiotic to be found in fermented food, good bacteria, examples of good bacteria that can be found in fermented food is Streptococcus. Of course, you might be surprised. Now, the world of Streptococcus provides us with a perfect example of both good bacteria and bad bacteria. Now, while many people are familiar with, strep throat, which is a painful, infectious form of sore throat that is normally caused by a member of the group A subset of the Streptococcus family. Now, other strains of Streptococcus, such as S. thermophilus, are known to hinder the impact of carcinogens, that is, cancer-causing agents. And they also reduce the emergence of tumors, and they actually lower the risk of bladder cancer and colon cancer. That's Streptococcus thermophilus. That is the good type of Streptococcus, as opposed to the bad type of Streptococcus that can give sore throat. All right? Now, we have a third one, friendly bacteria that can be found in fermented food is Bifidobacterium. Bifidobacterium. Now, this is another family of bacteria that's becoming, increasingly popular. Now, a common strain in store-bought fermented foods will be Bifidobacterium bifidum, or B. bifidum, which reduces the effects of rheumatoid arthritis, and it also enhances our immune response. Now, meanwhile, its sister substrain B, which is the breve and the longum varieties, actually lower blood cholesterol and they diminish allergies, respectively. While the Bifidobacterium brevi help to, lower cholesterol, then Bifidobacterium longum helps to, diminish allergies in the body. Now, one could feel a set of encyclopedia with the names and beneficial effects of these microbacteria that proliferate in fermented foods. Now, the most important thing to remember is that fermented foods offer a ready supply of these bacteria that go a long way to strengthen our immune system as well as to keep diseases at bay. Now we move to the second part of this second half in our conversation. I said we'll talk about a few examples of, friendly bacteria and then the diseases and conditions that can be addressed when we consume fermented foods that are bubbling with these friendly bacteria. Now, when you take a lot of fermented food regularly with these friendly bacteria we have mentioned, it can help in addressing things like heart disease, like skin health, like in combating allergies. I mentioned the fact that some people are lactose intolerant. That is, the lactose is the sugar in milk. Some people, when they take milk, they become intolerant of the lactose that is present in milk. But when milk is fermented, they are able to tolerate it now, which means they are no longer allergic to it because the process of fermentation will have made the bacteria in the milk to break down the lactose, the sugar in the milk, so the sugar is no longer there because it has been fermented. And so allergies no longer occur. In that sense, therefore, fermented food can be can be used to address allergies in some situations, right? Fermented food can also be used to address things like colon cancer prevention, as well as even help those who are undergoing treatment for colon cancer. Because again, one of the things that happens with some of the conventional treatment for colon cancer and other cancers like chemotherapy actually deranges the microflora, the balance in the intestinal flora. And so consuming fermented food during cancer treatment can help to repopulate the digestive tract with friendly bacteria, improve digestion, improve food absorption, and help the individual to gain weight, and because they are better able to absorb their nutrients. Now, fermented food can also be useful in addressing mental health for that matter. Okay, very wonderful things. Now, let's look at a few things about making fermented vegetables. Now, I mentioned the fact that you can go on YouTube and learn how to make all of those things. I don't want to spend a lot of time teaching how to make these different types of fermented foods. You can find that on many wonderful videos on YouTube. But I just want to highlight a few things. One, how to choose a medium to use for your fermentation. The truth of the matter is that we can ferment pretty much anything. You can ferment vegetables, you can ferment fruits, you can ferment juices, you can ferment teas, you can ferment milk, you can even ferment meat and fish. Each has its own fermentation process, and it's very fascinating to watch unfold. Now, I was born in Ghana in the early 1960s, precisely 1961, first half of 1961, okay? And while growing up in Ghana as a child, I know that we used to use, a particular spice in making our sauces that we used to eat our boiled yams and boiled plantain and boiled coconut. That spice is actually fermented fish. Some mischievous elements will call it rotten fish. It's not rotten fish. It's deliberately and intentionally fermented, salted and fermented. So it doesn't rot. Actually, it doesn't breed worms. It has no contamination, because it is heavily salted and fermented. And we used to call it momoni. I mean, those who grew up in Ghana or Ghanaians who may be listening to me understand what momoni is. We grew up in the Ashanti region of Ghana, all right? And we used to use momoni a lot. It's fermented fish. We blend it, and then we use it to spice our sauce that we used to make from, tender purple coconut leaves to make that sauce, or garden eggs, cooked garden eggs or aubergine to make the sauce that we used to eat our boiled plantain or boiled yam or boiled coconut. We call it abomu. That sauce is called abomu. And then you use momoni, fermented fish, as a spice. Wow, it gives it one unique flavor like this that makes it very interesting. If you have never tasted it before, if you visit Ghana, please try it. It's wonderful. Okay, now, fermented fish that is called momoni is very interesting, and I wish I could lay hands on it again. I'm even salivating right now. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, on this episode of Exposé, we won't be focusing on fermenting meats, as it is a much riskier process. But if something that tickles your fancy, there's plenty of information to be found out there that can help you. Now, typically, most people first ferment uses cabbage as a medium, as it's one of the easiest and most straightforward ferments to perform. You make your sauerkraut. Now from there, you can challenge yourself to try a variety of other ferments. You can ferment cucumber and what have you to make your pickles and all of that. Now, in choosing a fermenting container, it's best to avoid metals and plastics, because the acids that are produced by your ferments can leach toxic chemicals from the plastics or corrode your metals. So it's easy to find ceramic pots that are specifically made for fermenting, but these tend to be pretty pricey. So as such, airtight glass containers are probably the best options if you are getting started with fermentation. Now, a quarter-gallon or half-gallon container should be good enough for you to start your fermenting. Okay? Now, the reason cabbage is so easy to ferment is because it contains its own sugars, and that means that you don't need to add anything to get your ferment going. Now, with many other foods, however, you have to add some kind of sugar that the bacteria can feed on. It's called the prebiotic, the food for the probiotic. The probiotic is the bacteria itself. The prebiotic is the food or the sugar or the carb that the bacteria will be feeding on while they are doing their job of fermentation. All right? And these sugars are called prebiotics, like I said. Now, you pretty much have, free range in deciding what kind of sugar you want to use in your ferment. It can be brown sugar, it can be coconut sugar, maple syrup, honey. All of them will serve well. But if you find yourself worried about the sugar content of your final products, don't be, because you see, like I said, the microbacteria actually feed on the sugar, and by the time the fermentation is done, the sugar won't be present in your final product, because it's the microbacteria that want the sugar, not you. Now, fruits, much like cabbage, contain plenty of sugar already, so you won't need an additional source of sugar if you're fermenting fruit. However, in the case of fermenting yogurts, from milk products, either animal milk or plant milk, particularly animal milk that contains lactose, which is a milk sugar, whether it is cow milk or goat milk or sheep milk or camel milk, adding a little sugar may be necessary to get the process going. Okay? Now, if you're a vegan, then dairy ferments are most definitely not for you. However, if you're simply someone who abstains from dairy due to its various, adverse effects on health, if you're lactose intolerant, for example, I'm happy to inform you that dairy behaves quite differently in your body once it is fermented. Now, fermentation is a delicate process, and it's very important to be mindful of maintaining the right temperature in the area where you choose to let your ferment sit for days or weeks. Now, the question is asked, how long should I let my ferment sit for? There's no firm answer for this, but that's all part of the fun. You see, effective fermentation times, the period you spend, whether 5 days or 10 days or 15 days to conclude your process, is based on how much prebiotic you add and what temperature your ferments maintain. But with experience, however, you come to recognize that this is an art. You know what to look for and what to taste for to know when to end your fermentation process. Of course, personal preferences also come into play here as well. Many foods will have sufficiently fermented, the entire thing you want to ferment will have been sufficiently fully fermented within a week. But that time can be extended or it can be reduced depending on what you want. For example, in the case of coconut kefir, you might like it, a little bit bubbly, and that will require a longer fermentation time. Or if you want it less bubbly, then you don't need to make it sit there for so long. Now, similarly, most vegetables will break down more and develop a stronger, more vinegar type of taste the longer it stays. As such, if you prefer milder flavors, you don't want it that strong sour taste, then you might want to allow your ferment, to sit just for a few days. Now, the best thing to do, aside from consulting recipes, is to taste your food at regular intervals as you are fermenting it, maybe every 3 days, every 2 days, or maybe even every 4 days. And this will allow you to experience and understand the relationship between time and the various stages of the fermentation process, in addition to allow you to determine what kind of taste is pleasing to your taste bud. This is how far we can go on fermented foods. Again, this weekend from Friday is our Easter weekend. Permit me to wish you Happy Easter in advance. And may the Lord of Easter, Jesus Christ, our Lord himself, bless you during this Easter week as you get closer to him to particularly appreciate what he came to do for us on the planet. He came to offer himself as a sacrifice for humanity. And we are grateful to God for sending his only begotten Son to us. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, has come, he has died, he has resurrected. And we are commemorating and celebrating that event in history. He came, he died, he resurrected for our redemption and our justification, and we celebrate that fact. And we rejoice in the reality of it as we have found salvation through him, and we have been reconciled back to God through repentance and faith in Jesus Christ. God bless you and happy Easter. I love you. Bye.